This is Rogue Wing, Coraline, or Helen RD over at Starship Modeler. Welcome to the workshop. Alright. Going to put the Enterprise build on the back burner for a bit while I wait for some supplies and at least one element I'm looking for to actually get produced. So, in the interim, and mostly because I'm tired of looking at an empty workbench, I'm going to do a quick little project on the side. That being the Round 2 reissue of the Bird of Prey, first seen in Star Trek 3. Round 2 reissued the kit, but most of it is still very much the kit we remember shortly after, actually from Generations is when they introduced the kit. Kit's molded in a color that could only be described as Army Men green. Detail is fairly crisp, if a little soft on some of the corners. Panel lines are well delineated on the wings. Main fuselage hasn't really changed much from the original kit, at least on the upper side of it. Obviously this one's screaming for weathering and some paint adjustments. But it's a fairly decent sized kit. All in all, the length's, it's about, by the time it all gets said and done, ship itself would be about 10 inches long with a wingspan of a little over a foot, depending on how you build it. Now, one of the big changes that Round 2 made in their new version is in the wing baffles. There are now actually 3 sets of wing baffles, replacing the previous 2. You've got wings fully down, or cruise mode, battle mode. Wings partially up for cruise mode, and of course the accompanying baffle pieces. The wings cannot be made positionable without an aftermarket kit that is far more fiddly than I really want to deal with. Final position for the wings, and one of the big modifications to this kit over the old kit, is landed. This allowing for the option of either closed or open landing gear. So this kit also gives you landing gear bay, plastic bits for the landing gear struts, the landing gear pads. There's also a boarding ramp. The bottom of the fuselage has been modified to allow for that open bay piece or the closed bay piece, depending on which way you decide to build it. And in an effort to make the landing gear stable, they have cast the landing gear struts themselves out of metal. The only clear pieces for this one are the photon torpedo launcher and the engine module, which is combination warp and impulse on this ship. The base that came with the original kit has been replaced by one of Round 2's standard dome bases. There are not, I don't know how well you can see it, let's do this right. There's one big change to the decal sheet on here, namely the addition of these decals for the wing baffles, actually for the hinge pieces. You can trim these, they're designed for the for the wings fully down, but you can trim them to fit the other two wing positions. Let me get that back in the pack. The instructions, let me flip this up just a little, are your standard round 2 fare. You start with deciding which mode you're going to build it in, and it shows you which position you'll wind up with. Step-by-step instructions are pretty straightforward. Once you get the fuselage together, you go to the landing gear, and then you assemble the upper hull and all of that. The wings are actually the last thing you put on, and you put it on the stand. The other thing this gives you is a well-detailed painting guide. Mostly this is designed to reproduce what you saw typically in the various series. But of course, you can run however you want with that. On this build, I'm probably going to go with cruise mode, mostly because just about everybody seems to build these things wings down or landed. So I'm going to go kind of a middle ground. That and the fact a lot of the times in Star Trek The Next Generation, you saw these ships running in cruise mode and still fighting and everything. So that said, I don't expect this build to take a whole lot, because for all the pieces that are involved, it's actually not that difficult a kit. The only real complication comes in adding the landing gear set, which, mostly for lack of shelf space, I'm not going to be dealing with. Stay tuned. Alright, as I figured, this thing ain't going to take long to put together. There we see basically the first 3 steps. Got my cruise position baffles. Parts fit pretty well. Not going to really need any seam filling there. Same goes for the other baffle. The wing guns, I freely admit, are kind of basic, and would really look better if you replaced them with like brass tube and that. But they also still look pretty good, and will look even better once I get them painted up. These are actually still, I think, the original molds. I did have a little flash to clean up on the smaller guns here, but still looks pretty sharp. Seam sanded pretty well. And let's face it, there could actually be a seam down there if you were to build this thing for real. I've also got the closed landing gear doors in place now. Just a little press fit and run a bead of glue along the seam. Comes down nice and tight. Looks pretty sharp. At this rate, I may have most of it built today and get it in paint tomorrow. We'll play that part by ear, but for right now, that's where we sit. Moving right along, we have in the clamps our 2 wings. Once the glue has had a chance to set up on both wings, I'll go in and sand the seams. I will likely insert the guns into the wings at this point, but I'm probably going to keep these off until I get ready for final assembly so that I can paint these separately. After all, they wind up an entirely different color than most of the rest of the ship. Alright, we're at the end of what's been a very busy day at the workbench, actually. As I figured, all the major assemblies on the Klingon Bird of Prey are now done. Wings are out of the clamps. Not too worried about that seam because it's going to be up against the hull and not really all that visible. Looking good. Got the main body of the ship done. I haven't installed the photon launcher or the warp engine yet because I want to paint those separately and not have to worry about masking them. So that's ready. I also haven't installed the so-called cloaking ring, again, so it can be painted separately a lot easier. But at this point I could pretty much mock it up. Guns go in almost as though it were a snap kit. Let's see, I want that set of baffles. Presses together pretty well. I'll glue it all together properly once I get paint on it. She goes together really well. I could almost leave her like that, except for fear of her coming apart. I would not want to mask those off separately though, so she's not going to be fully assembled until paint's in place.